I will start by saying Luke is a fiction writer, essayist, and a casual academic, which if you're casual, it also suggests the idea that it is a formal academic, a smart casual academic, perhaps a cocktail academic as well. His first book, An Elegant Young Man, is a collection of interlinked semi-autobiographical short stories set in Liverpool and won the New South Wales Premier's Literary Award for New Writing. The second book, Intimate Antipathies, I can't get my words right tonight, can I? A collection of essays on the ordinary madness of the writing life, was published in 2019. He's published just about everywhere. The most recent novel we're about to look at tonight, An Ordinary Ecstasy, is his third with Giramondo, contains 7 short stories, all of which explore the lives of people whose days are marked by anxiety, tenderness and exaltation. These stories were written in our recent time of isolation when Carman would wander the evening streets alone. Oh, all alone. As he writes, when I looked at the silent unit blocks and the empty sundowner shacks around me on the walks, all I could hear was the imaginary voices of the people who would be around me in a time more ordinary. In the end, I was so assailed by the chattering cavalcade of strangers that I lay awake at night after my walks, with their murmurs becoming an obsessive constancy of oratory. With these new works of fiction, I have tried to exercise myself of the above possession by bringing this unsolicited heteroglossia to the page. They are stories of desire, grief and exultation. The collection reflects, as the title suggests, on life at its most ordinary and ecstatic. Life as such as it is. He's been called a post-grunge lit writer, a bogan flaneur, part connoisseur, part anthropologist. I need to see more Paisley, more flannel if we can for grunge, please. And I love this book. I'm enamoured with this book. This is, for me, was reading it, I love the fluidity of the stories as I read through them, and like just swimming in a current. You're going along with it, and for a moment there you tread water and you stop for a moment and sit there with the story and then keep going. And that's the part that I love most about it. And that sense of, like, you sit there with the character with that inner reflection, and you start with that character in their situation, but then you go off on digressive tangents and come back in and flow out and around, and you get to see their memories, their fears, their doubts, and their hopes, and even their questions. So my first question for you, though, is what is your most unextraordinary day? Like, I'm Miss Congeniality, and I'm going to ask you that question as, you know, what's your favourite date? But what is your most unordinary day ever?
My most unordinary day ever. That's a really good question. That's a great question. And before I answer, thank you for that generous introduction. Thanks, Ali, and thanks WestWords for having us here, and thanks for everyone for being here. It's fantastic to have an audience. I really appreciate it. And it's a strange question in the sense that the first thing that comes to my mind is something that really did influence my thinking in terms of where this book came from. You mentioned it, that's a publicity sheet, some of that you were reading off, and so they ask you, tell us something that we can tell the marketing people that sounds interesting about how the book came about. And so I did try to think of something interesting. It was hard. And I wrote it during COVID. And like everybody else, it was it had derailed my normal experience. And so during my state-mandated 10-minute outdoor activities, I was wandering around on the beach, because I've recently moved to the Central Coast just before COVID kicked in. And so I'd be wandering around on the beach. I was the only one there, and I was really missing people. I was missing everybody. Everybody was probably in the same boat to an extent. And I started having this idea in my head about what is the most... I started asking myself, I run out of people to talk to. I'm just asking myself questions. I'm saying, what is the most intense thing I've ever experienced? And you running through a whole reel of different experiences. And then, of course, I came back to one which probably for a lot of people is a kind of cliched answer, but it happened to be the moment I was in the room when my son was born. Very standard kind of understandable, intense moment. And then I started sort of deviating away from that, and I said, what's the worst thing I've ever seen? Like, what's the worst thing I've actually laid eyes on. And strangely enough, whether this is or not, I mean, it's more or less random. It just popped into my head. A funeral I had been to, which was a long, long time ago, and it was of somebody, sorry to say, who was very, very young. And, it's a very sad story, very sad turn of events. But I was watching a very, very small grave or coffin go down into a grave, and I saw the father, who was, somebody in my life, and he collapsed. He went weak at the knees and he fell down. And it was funny, what popped into my head at that moment was, I didn't know people actually went weak at the knees. I thought it was just a figure of speech, but he fell straight down. And then I thought to myself, that moment, I was in that moment, and I thought something totally detached from it. It popped into my head. And that was originally why the working title for this, which ended up having nothing to do with it really, was originally, and it was a purely working title, it was Splinters of Ice, because you may know, it's very famous, Graham Greene had this idea. He was lying in a hospital bed, I think for war veterans, and everyone was groaning and wounded around him, and he was wounded himself in this hospital thing, and the nurses are coming and helping everybody. And he said, this is horrible, this is the most horrible place imaginable. Yeah. And he said, but as a writer, I know that I'm going to be able to use this stuff someday. And he realised that that's what every writer has in them, is a splinter of ice, where no matter what terrible things are happening around them, some little whisper in their brain says, well, this is great material. and I ended up moving away from that idea, but that's how the book strangely, conceptually came into being, with just that exact thought. So how you deduced that, I don't know, but you discovered it somehow.
So then, for you, if you're exploring all these ordinary moments, what is the place of the ordinary in contemporary fiction then?
That's another good question, because I think that's the rub of contemporary fiction, in a sense, is that, the old cliche about fiction is you're meant to find the extraordinary in the ordinary. That's kind of the writer's mandate. Everybody, you might think of the William Carlos Williams example of the so much depends on a red wheelbarrow slick with rain beside the white chickens, or Joseph Conrad saying that the writer's job is accomplished if you can draw attention to the man hammering the fence posts in the field outside your window, even for a moment. The ordinary is exalted in fiction, but I don't know if it is. I don't know if that's being treated with due respect in contemporary fiction, and I'm not sledging anybody by saying that, but I wonder if life gets left out too much. And I think there's at least in my experience, ordinary people don't really make an appearance that often in fiction, except as a explicitly ordinary person, if that makes any sense. So ordinary people become sort of background figures in contemporary fiction, because in my experience, this is the kind of, I guess, the irony of an Ordinary Ecstasy as an idea, is that people are very, very weird, and they're very, very fast. They're very interesting and unpredictable, and they say crazy things all the time, and you just don't see enough ordinary people represented in all their everyday ordinary madness, I think. And that's what I wanted to capture in these stories, is these are totally ordinary people, but what they're doing and saying is just ridiculous a lot of the time. And the way they're behaving and the way they're approaching situations is completely bewildering. And I can't wrap my head around why they're doing it. And they probably don't know themselves. And I think that's at least how I go through my life, and that's how the people around me seem to go through their life, you know.
Because I found all the characters fascinating in their most
Right.
ordinariness. Like for me, in my own classes, I'm teaching my students with stories, and they say, "Oh, my life's boring." I go, no, it's not. There's nothing boring about your life. There's something that you can grab hold of, but they don't see that their ordinariness is a blessing. They don't see that there's something that is innately fascinating about their general routines and their day-to-day lives and things they say to their mate across the classroom, which you laugh at, and they go, "So did you hear that?" "Yeah." And go, "Write that down for later on."
Yeah, yeah.
No, don't sir. Yeah, it's going in the story. But those moments where you capture just that normalness of life, without fanfare, without necessarily pulling it into a metaphor or making it didactic, is a case of just here are normal people doing normal things.
That's right. I think that's a good word for it, is a fanfare. And as a teacher, I know there's other teachers here. I don't know how many. There could be. You could all be teachers. I don't know.
Represent.
But one of the things that you see, because I have a lot of teachers in my family, and one of the things you see is that teachers, they either they get completely run out of town by their profession, or they become really, really well-rounded kind of people. That's just my experience, and I think it's because you're going in, you're dealing with all these different people all the time, and you can't be sort of this fake, thin, veneer kind of shallow person. And the reason fanfare stands out to me is because I think you've helped me to see that what I'm trying to say is that so much of contemporary fiction is about finding the things which are marketable and celebratory about a particular person or a particular story, rather than just dealing with people in all their ordinary complexity and all the strangeness that goes along with that, without trying to find something about them which makes them noteworthy, or something about them which justifies them being in a story or having a story about them in the first place.
Is it more of a case of not having a character that's in their darkest moment, but in the case of their most ordinary day-to-day, getting milk from Woolies, going about their life, and there's no massive trauma that drives them, but just the ordinariness of, I'm getting tonight fish and chips for dinner.
Yes, exactly. Like any of these people that are in the collection, you could find something about them and say, well, this is a story that I know. This is a story I understand. I could tell to people, this person over here, you got to hear this story. But that's not the kind of direction I wanted to take this, and it's not a particularly outside the box kind of idea. But I just happen to think that it's my experience, and I know a lot of people, it'd be the same for them. And when I ask people, speak to people, it seems to be pretty commonplace. Is that generally your every day is filled with all kinds of internal drama that sometimes you're not even sure you're going to be able to withstand it. And so one of the title story came to me because, again, I was just out walking around, and I had this an idea that sometimes I suppose it's common with writers. It came to me as a vision, in the sense of I could sort of see the scene already, even though there was nothing about it that seemed to recommend I should write this down. It was just, I was walking again on the beach, and I was looking at it, and suddenly I had this vision of a woman in her kitchen alone, who, for whatever reason, is possessed by this feeling, just an internal calamity that has come up either because of a memory or a series of associations that is so strong that she thinks she doesn't even know if she can make it or how she's going to make it to the end of the kettle boiling. She's just, nothing is happening, nothing explains this, but it's happening to her. And that's how life seems to me, is that you, all of a sudden, the most ordinary moment in your life could become absolutely overwhelming, and one chain of associations, of memories or feelings or impressions, suddenly you're in an avalanche of that stuff, and there just seems to be no recourse. How do you deal with it? And that's what I was attempting to portray, I guess, in this
I
book.
felt that when I was reading, like with the character Holly. So
Yep.
she's swiping through her phone, and there's a match on some dating app. But then it just goes off with her memories, and you follow it, and you go along with that journey, and you go along with that sense of, this is what I would do. Like not what she would necessarily, but that idea of my brain will jump from memory to memory. It will jump from idea to idea with no logical connection, but it makes perfect sense in your brain at the time.
Yeah.
And that level of you go, that's a real person. I find that person, in your own head. Kind of
well, I appreciate you saying that, and it may not be the case of everybody, and I'm sure it is and isn't to certain degrees or whatever. But that was the original intent with this, and that's why that story has the title attributed to it, because, or the title comes from that story, because that's what I thought. Okay, that's going to be the theme for all of these stories in various ways, and it won't be the same thing again and again, but every character in this book pretty much has that unfortunate, or whatever you want to call it, intense experience at some point. Because I don't think I go through a day without something like that happening, and I suspect most people don't.
So then, over the time from that initial story, how did the vision change for the entire work, for the 7 stories?
The vision, I don't know if the vision for it didn't change, except for that initial idea that I had about this Graham Greene idea, the splinter of ice and so on. And I actually wrote a story for that. And it was going to be about a man who goes to an ophthalmologist, and the ophthalmologist tells him, one of your eyes is off by 0.1% of a millimeter, and you're going to have to correct that. And he's a middle-aged man, and he goes, okay, sure, fine. And then when he's leaving, he realizes, wait a minute, all the mistakes he's ever made in his entire life, he can suddenly trace it back to the fact that his perception was slightly off by one tiny degree. And he starts going backwards through his head, and he's like, oh my God. And then what I realized is that's such a writer's story. Yeah. And one of the things I decided was, I don't want any writers in this as my main characters, even though they sneak in because I'm a writer and I can't help it. But I don't want to be like, I don't know, this Stephen King syndrome where all my protagonists happen to be writers. And
maybe Justin, who's writing the work on crustaceans and the kingdom of crustacea.
That's right. I made him a poet, and so that I could get around it. And there is a journalist as well, so that's cheating. But I tried my best to keep those special people out.
So in terms of collecting all the different moments of ordinariness, I'm going to ask, where did they come from? Because there's such a breadth in 7 stories of such unique, ordinary moments. How do you then whittle down the plethora of ordinariness to go, these ones are going to work, or at least give me something to focus on?
It actually became the exact opposite problem, where some of these stories, this is a collection of 7 stories, and up until this point I'd only ever written 1,500 word stories were my average. Yeah. Very small stories, not even really short stories, some kind of microfiction or something like this. And I started writing some of these, and they completely ran off the rails. They went crazy. This book was twice the size that it is in published form. Some of these stories became just monstrous, long enough to be novels in their own right. And it was only thanks to the good sense of my editor, who said, this is not optimal. Some of these can be, distilled and crystallized, that I went through, and I had to get rid of so much. I just had way too much material. But there are some other ways I kind of cheated or experimented. And so one of them, for example, was in the story An Ordinary Ecstasy. I was writing the story, and I said to my friend, I have lots of memories, but eventually people are going to be able to tell that all these memories are infected by the one perspective. So can you help me write this? And she said, I don't know, how am I going to help you write this? I don't want to do that. And I said, oh, no, trust me, if you're willing to do it, we can do this really easily. And because I'm a creative writing teacher, I said, look, I'll tell you this. Have you ever heard of a guy called Joe Brainerd? And I don't know, has anyone heard of Joe Brainerd? He was an American writer, and he was involved with the Andy Warhol scene, like the pop art and Velvet Underground, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, he had this idea that you don't need ideas. He said, I never have ideas. What I do is I just write, I remember, and then I write a memory. And he said, that's all I do. And that was literally all he did for a long time. He wrote a whole book, a novel-sized book, and every line in it was, I remember. Like he would write, I remember when the worst thing in the world was polio. I remember the first time I saw my mother cry. I was eating an apricot pie. I remember when my father said, keep your hands out from under the blankets when I tuck you in at night. But he said it in a nice way. He just wrote that again and again. He wrote the whole book like that. And it was such a huge success. It was called I Remember. And it was such a huge success that his publisher said to him, you've got to write another one of those I Remember books. So he did. He wrote another I Remember, and it was called I Remember More. And believe it or not, this is absolutely true. That was such a success that the publisher said, you've got to do this again. So he wrote More, I Remember More. And it was the same thing again. Believe it or not, there was More, I Remember More, the Christmas edition. There was more. It just kept on coming. And I said, he got totally crazy with this. And he said, look, I've discovered something that is revolutionary. And he went off the deep end with it in the end. But apparently it seems to work. If you get people to just write, I remember as an anaphora, then they naturally become writers. And so I said to my friend, let's just sit down. You do 10 of those. Simple sentences, as easy as you like, no pressure. She sat down, she wrote 10 memories. I said, thank you very much. Do you give me permission? Yes. And I gave those memories to the character. And, I changed them. I fancied them up and all this kind of stuff with my best impression of fancy writing. And they're in the book now, and that's the character. And, I don't know what, there's no way for me to know whether people will be able to tell. Maybe that's the point, that you can't tell. I don't know. But they're in there, and it's a technique that worked for me.
So how much of you is in here? Or is it hidden away?
No, look, there's one story in here which is actually, as it happens, the largest story, which is told in first person because it is really the most semi-autobiographical piece. And it's called Tears on Main Street. And the reason for that, including that, is simply because there was one character that I wanted to capture. This person, I wanted one of my characters to be based on somebody I know who is the most extraordinarily inventive, ingenious, unpredictable human being I have ever met in my life, who is a total autodidact, has no formal training, is a weird comic philosopher, the strangest, most enigmatic person I've ever met. I love this person to death. I wanted that character to be in a book somewhere, but I don't know how conceivably anybody could imagine what his mind is like. So I just needed somebody to be looking at him in the story rather than him, rather than the perspective to be able to go into his mind, because that's impossible. Nobody could ever go into that mind and come out sane on the other end. So that one story is based on it's based on a true story.
Right. Yeah, in Hollywood terms, based on a true story.
Exactly. But it was only just to capture that one person, and that person in the book is Saint Augustine, and
he's one of my favourite characters from the book. It was just that character where you just go, I can see him behind the deli counter at Woolies. He's this massive Fijian bloke, and he's going, I can imagine him there. And for me, watching that journey and why he's doing what he's doing, which makes no sense. But you go along for the ride anyway, because you want to follow this character and you want to be a part of that action and part of that simplicity of his life, and you're going along for the ride, and you end up as drunk as he is, as stoned as he is, and seeing things out the corner of your head which you're not probably meant to be seeing. Yeah. But there's a character which go, that's logical.
It is, I mean, arbitrarily this person has decided that they are going to go into a war against the indignities of time by seeking out a former nemesis from primary school and attempting to defeat him in mixed martial arts, because he believes that will redeem him as a 40-year-old man. But which makes no sense. But that's the fascinating part of some characters. Their actions take you by surprise.
And my other favourite character was Justin was funny because he just had this sense of being this academic. Well, a wannabe academic, or a wannabe poet.
He's a wannabe poet, yeah.
But Goonbag Press was my favourite line. Just the idea of starting this publishing company called Goonbag Press to make your own work and have this book launch with some hardcore / beatdown / metal band, which I went looking on. Okay, well, what does beatdown sound like? So I went hit Spotify last night and go, okay, right. Sick of it all. Here we go. Turn that up as we're reading, kind of thing.
I'm glad the genre actually exists. I wasn't sure. I just took a guess.
It's got to exist somewhere.
Yeah, I suppose everything's been done. But I mean, Justin to me is interesting because he's so much less of a person than his partner, and the whole, I suppose, the premise of that story is that his partner is fated to cling on to him, despite the fact that it makes no sense. She could do so much better, and I think that's becoming more of a contemporary subject right now, right at the moment. I guess it's sort of the failure for men to meet standards acceptable to cohabitate with, and that's definitely the case with Justin. I mean, he's kind of the type of artist you've probably met if you've had anything to do with artists, where he seems to think that all he has to do is that life just owes him. And his genius will just carry him through, but he doesn't have to attend to anything to make himself a full human being. He's a slob, and he's arrogant, and he's oblivious, and he's self-centered, and all those things you expect an artist to be, you know.
And you wanted, if you met him down the pub, you'd probably smack him one in the teeth for being a bit of a pillock.
Yes, and he probably couldn't fight back either, to tell you the truth. So I'm sure we've all met plenty of Justins in our time, but yeah.
I think the other character that I liked a lot was Liam, the guitarist, who's playing for the opening of his friend's art exhibition. And I know guitarists, I know musicians, and it's like, that is so true. It was just this moment where you're going, what I loved as well was the sense of familiarity with Katoomba. Like, I can picture Katoomba go, there's the railway line, there's the Carrington Hotel up on the corner, there's a little pub down there, and here's a guy who's about to make it big, and yet just everything's just that step away from what he really wants. And the ending of the story is going, oh dude, really, please. Like this moment of it's almost like that. The end of the story has this moment of Hollywood exaltation, and then it's snatched away, and you go, Sid, you're right.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm picking on artist types, but it's Liam's problem is that I mean, he thinks he's going somewhere, and maybe he is, but that's all he can see. You know, he thinks he's getting out of this place, so to speak, and he thinks he's slumming it by still being around. You know, he thinks he's slumming it by being in Katoomba, in a sense. But he's got this artist friend who said, "Hey, you're a guitarist, you're a musician. Come and play at my exhibition. It'll make it that little bit better." And he's sort of thinking, "Well, I've gone beyond this now. I've got a hit on Triple J. I can't be playing at art gallery exhibition openings and that sort of thing. I'm a name now. I can't be riding the train." And that's his mentality going in. And his real failure is that he just can't see what's really going on around him, and it comes back to bite him, pretty harshly.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the hell happens to him next, because the story ends, but I like to think that he learns from that and comes back as a better human being, but I don't know.
He's a guitarist, so probably not.
Probably not. That's
so
he's a guitarist.
I'm the drummer.
Yeah.
I'm the guy who hangs around musicians, so I'm even lower on the.
You've got an axe to grind.
Yeah. I wanted to ask though, in terms of the style of the novel, of the works, that, like, looking at dialogue, for example, as a teacher, you go, okay, speaker, new line, and I'm reading through going, this doesn't hold to convention, but it didn't trip me up, and I was wondering what was the choice behind that particular style and structure.
Well, this was one of the things I've always been trying to accomplish is I want that feeling that you first mentioned when we started talking about being swept away, because or something like that, like the feeling of either being possessed by it or it carrying you with its own rhythms and momentum, the writing that is. And that's my favourite kind of writing. I like to start writing and feel like I'm losing control and I'm just being carried along. And I want to do that with this piece, but I wanted the emphasis to be on people speaking. I mean, a lot of the characters go on and on and on interminably, and some of the things they're saying, they're full of redundancies and all kinds of bizarre ornamentation that's not literate. It's fluent, but they're not intellectuals. A lot of these people, God forbid, and they're just talking. It's almost like a stream of consciousness from them a lot of the time, because they're trying to figure things out, and a lot of the time they're just sitting next to other people talking, trying to make sense of the world around them. And I wanted the same effect for that speech. I didn't want it to feel like, it's creative writing, I suppose, cliche or whatever, that dialogue should be dramatically pared down to the most precise and efficient transaction, because someone waffling on, even if it's real, even if people actually do talk like that, it bores the shit out of people. So you're supposed to minimize it, distill it right down. But I wanted this to be different. I want people to be able to go on, and but I didn't want it to be a slog. I didn't want you to sort of feel like, okay, when's this person going to stop talking? I wanted to feel like it's part of the rhythm of the story around it. And the kind of bewilderment and ecstasy and exaltation that's going on in all the
I think it also has echoes of people in real life, because you do run on from each other. There's not like a little gap where there's a pause between someone speaking. You talk over someone, you talk against them, and that natural flow it happens, and our brains go, yep, this makes perfect sense.
Well, unfortunately, it seems to be the case that a lot of really great speechifiers are terrible listeners. They're wonderful at talking, but they might not necessarily hear a word you have to say. And I know a lot of the people in my family are. I think it's one of the reasons I became a writer, is because I was just so fascinated by the kind of people who are naturally fluent and erudite and charismatic when they speak. I think if admiring or envying that capacity was what drove me to writing, because then you can sit down and you can fake it. You can slowly put together something that's quite convincing. But I just never had the gift for the gab like some people I know, and not a lot of those people with the gift for the gab are wonderful, intimate listeners. They tend to be just sort of waiting for their next go. And I've learned to appreciate those people despite their flaws.
Which the character towards the back end of the novel, where he's the Blacktown Citizen of the Year, and he has that flow of story, and you're going, keep going, dude. He's the kind of guy that is going to have a story for every occasion, and won't shut up, and will keep going until someone interrupts him. But then he'll pick up the story where he left off. It could be half an hour later, but he'll keep going. That moment where you're going, that is just like, I know someone like that. There's always a story to be told. There's always something to be going through.
Endless stories, constantly punctuated with to cut a long story short. They're starting to get somewhere. To cut a long story short, they move on to the next chapter. And
it's still a long story.
Oh, it's not going to end.
No, I think it's almost like an opposite. Making a short story long along the way. By the end of the novel, what do you want your reader to take away?
I don't know. Part of the intent with this, I had some strange ideas, a lot of strange ideas when I was putting this together, and one of them was that I didn't want this book, like I said in this conversation, it's come up already, the idea of fanfare. I didn't want this collection to have anything in it that sort of is asking, it has any cultural currency right now that might, work well on a panel. A writer's panel, and say, this book is about this, this, and this, and this kind of story and that kind of story, and it touches on these issues and these concepts which are fashionable. I want it to be kind of anachronistic, and I think that comes back to something that's hinted at in some of the stories there, where, especially the Ordinary Ecstasy, where Holly is trying to deal with Tinder, basically, online phone app dating, and she's too old really to learn the ropes with that sort of thing. I think, and she probably feels it's a bit beneath her or something like that, or it's grotesque in some way. And I just think that contemporary life, at least to me, and I was born last century, and in some ways I'll probably die last century, but to me, I think a lot of this is about not being particularly happy with the kind of cultural or what would you say? I think we're being asked just to go through life a little too quickly in some ways, and a little too superficially in some ways. And I remember when COVID first hit, I was kind of optimistic because, I don't know if you remember, but it was just happened to be one of the things I noticed when COVID first came along, and there was this weird thing where celebrities were suffering from a lack of attention. They weren't able to get in front of cameras and audiences and things, and so they started doing like little videos of themselves in their houses and singing John Lennon's "I Remember," Imagine, and everybody was like, "These people are disgusting. They're grotesque." And it was like weird when I thought, "Oh my God, people are realizing how terrible these celebrities are, and that we have our priorities all oriented wrong, and the supermarkets are bare shelved, and we'll all start learning new ways of being, and we'll all, hallelujah, kumbaya, blah, blah, blah." And of course it didn't happen, and it never will. But what I was hoping in, I suppose, in this was, I go back to what I was sort of thinking before about sort of the Joseph Conrad thing about, slowing things down and drawing attention to someone who you have nothing to gain by paying attention to this person. They're not going to teach you some story about their experience or enlighten you, or you're not going to learn any philosophy from this, but just slow right down and just look at this person who is going about their business. And to me, that's kind of what literature is about. It's about going against efficiency in some way, and finding out what's been left out by the pace of everyday life. And that's what I was hoping, if anything, that's what I was hoping these stories were going to reveal or contain in some
that life as it is, without trying to improve yourself, or life as it is and this is what I have to deal with, or life as it is and somehow I'll get there. Kind of like almost like a domestic, not oblivion, but a domestic ordinariness. Again, but that word just is a perfect summation, like that perfect ordinariness of that life of domestic run around. Like, you're getting the kids to go to sport, or you're doing the Woolies run and they're out of toilet paper again, and you can't get ice cream to this week. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think one of the key. I'm an idealist, and in some ways, and I think one of the tasks of writing about anything in the first place is you're supposed to apply revision. You're supposed to see things again. You're supposed to see things for a second time, or in a new way, and anything that you've just described, it could be meaningless, but it doesn't have to be. It just depends on the way you look at it, and what you see when you look. This is saying that always comes. I think it was Natalie Goldberg, and it's something like, all art is a foreign city. You spend enough time in it, and the strangeness and confusion is the reward. And I think you could say the same thing about just everyday life. You just slow down and look at it in a new way, and it becomes fascinating and in all sorts of new, in interesting ways. Which I think it becomes quite powerful because it slows you down. Yeah, slowing down is key. Yeah, I don't know if that's just because I'm slowing down, prematurely maybe, but yeah, that was a big part of it, I think. So for you at the moment, whose work has inspired you or influenced you or challenges you almost? Oh man, one of the other things that was happening is that actually my friend who I made do that I Remember task, I didn't make her, I encouraged her to. She said to me, well, what you should do? You should go and read The Dubliners.
I said, yeah, I could do that, but maybe I won't. And she said, no, give it a go, give it another go, you revisit it. And I went back, and all the stuff I'm trying to say about this book in some ways, I think, I saw there in that collection. There's a whole lot of other stuff going on, obviously, and I didn't understand all of it and everything, but I was like, okay, that was great. I'm going to go read Ulysses now.
Godspeed.
Yeah, and I did. And I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever read in my life. And I want to write my version of this right now, which was folly and it failed. But I did think, oh my God, I've got to learn how to do this. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to learn at least this sort of free, indirect way of managing and sort of corralling these different voices and perspectives and moving in and out at whim from first person to third person and all these really amazing technical things. And I wanted to see if I could do that with this book. And it was never written like that before in my life, and it was a real challenge. And there were times where I thought, good Lord, I have written this huge assemblage of nothing, just random words. What have I done? And and my publisher would sometimes, he'd say, oh, how's it going? And I'd say, oh, I need a lot more time because this is going really well. And I was really at sea with this, and I learned a lot, and if I, I'm really grateful that my friend encouraged me to reread James Joyce, which seems like something anyone who writes should have had their own, should have thought of that themselves. But I came to it slowly and late. So,
I think I'm the same. Like at some point, you go, I'll read that one eventually, and your brain goes, not today, please, come on.
Yeah, I can't say I absorbed every word and understood every nuance of it, but I got through. I came out the other end. Yeah.
So how then moving forward for you in terms of say next project or next idea, what has shaped and changed since writing this one and the learning from all that? What's your new takeaway for the new piece of a new piece of writing of some kind?
I just want to do more, and I want to get further along in what I don't know where I'm heading exactly, but what I've started here is I have already thought to myself, okay, I've learned something technically here. I've got some new technical capacities here. I've got to see how far they could go, and that's what I'm hoping to do next time, if I'm fortunate enough to have a next time, because these things take, they're long, and publishing is glacial and short-lived. There's an old cliche of most books have the shelf life of yogurt. They come out and 3 months later they are they're garbage and they get pulped and binned, and this one's it's already passing through on its journey, so I've got to buck up and start again, and it's not my job. My job is to write books. What happens with the publishing and all this and the selling, that's not my business. If it sells 4 or 5 copies, fine. I'm sorry to my publisher. That's really their money, but it's not my job. I've got to write. And I do, I would love to sit down and think, I should write something that people actually want to read. Something that will sell, and something I can provide for my family and look after my parents and give my child everything he needs to succeed in life. But it's looking like that's never going to happen because I'm never going to try.
Try crime writing.
I should try.
It's pretty big right now.
I know. So many that everything that I do is wrong from a commercial perspective, and I am absolutely blessed that Giramondo, who's my publisher, is non-commercial to the extent that they would even consider publishing something like this. Short story collections, they're not known to sell, and this is a collection of short stories which is basically a collection of novellas. It has no home really, and except for Giramondo, and if it wasn't for them, not only would I not be able to do it, but I don't think there would be any point
But for me, it's a beautiful work. Like, I really, honestly, I love it. It's one of those things where reading through and just sitting with the story, and like I said before, you flow with it. You come in, and like I was thinking about, who's the French painter with the little dot work? Seurat, pointillism.
Sorry,
not an art person, but that's the kind of thing where you almost zoom into a moment and you see those little brush strokes, and then you come back out to see the bigger picture, and you're moving in and out of that all the time through each of those particular stories. And that for me is what I found fascinating, because you have that connection with the character or the narrator and the person they're talking to or talking about, and you see those little moments from not only just their ordinariness but also the bigger picture of their life. Like at the beginning, Joseph standing in front of river of sewage running through the backyard, and I'm going, yeah, I can see that one. Like just this river of brown just going through, and like you're there going and watching him sort of go, put on his high vis vest and go around the block to talk to the foreman. And you go, mate, my backyard's full of crap. But it's that kind of thing you go, I love that kind of person. I love that kind of story where it just resonates for me, and that beautiful turns of phrase that holds it all together, and you're reading through the dialogue that takes you from character to character, and you're never drawn out of it. You're always kept in that flow and within the character, and you get to the end and you go, oh, we're stopped. But there's a completeness to each story. Like you're sort of going, I was reading last night going, oh, how many pages got to go? Oh, I got 4. Okay, fine. You get to the end, you go, oh, it's the end. But there's a complete wholeness to it, and you go, this is where it should end. There's no sense of, but I want more. It feels to me like a perfect coda, and you wrapped it up. It's like, oh, that's so good. And when you go back, I'm going to follow August again because I like August.
Oh man, well that means honestly, that means the world. You to have someone read it and feel that way, really does make it worthwhile. And I can't express that. I can't express how much I mean that. Not just because we're on stage in front of people, you know what I mean. But sitting there, you're just thinking, "What have I done?" And to have someone say, "Oh yeah, I like what you did there," it makes all the difference.
One last question for you. Whose voices do you want to hear in the future? Whose voices do you want to hear that might interest you to be reading about?
Oh, I never. I mean, to me, that's how I got into this crazy business in the first place. I just love. No, I don't love everybody. I love reading different voices, and that's why I originally was so drawn to Giramondo, because that's basically their thing. They're about finding voices that are really different, and so anything that's coming out of Giramondo, obviously, I'm reading a ton of people at the moment. I'm reading George Haddad, who is a local writer who has relatively recently written a novel called Losing Face, and it's absolutely brilliant. You got everyone from Tony Birch, Felicity Castagna, who some of you might know is a local who absolutely championing it, and for good reasons. Great, wonderful Western Sydney novel, and absolutely wonderful. There's a book that I just saw when I was coming in here that you may have noticed, Zahida Ghani, and who I have a book at home I just bought. It's called Pomegranate and Fig. Very, very, very unusual. I've only just started reading it. I haven't got far enough in it to give you any kind of real summary or explanation, but it's extremely lyrical, very, very rare kind of voice. Yumna Kassab is here right now in the audience, and Yumna has you've somehow managed to your second book. Yes, yeah. Well, Yumna is one of brilliant, absolutely brilliant writer. Her book Australiana not long ago came out. Mihaela Cristescu is in the back there, and Mihaela is a Romanian Australian poet who every year publishes a collection of Australian and Romanian poetry and short prose, which has been going now for like 7 years. So if you want, like voices you're not going to hear, I mean, that, in that case, for me, it's voices that they can't even read because half of it's in Romanian. But it's such an unlikely collection, and there's so much from this region that comes out constantly that is amazing to me. And I just finished Kate Jennings. A friend of mine recommended me to check out Kate Jennings, who is an author, Australian author, who kind of vanished as far as I know, but is having a weird kind of renaissance. And I just read her book, Snake, which in some ways reminded me, anyway, which was really, really, really mesmerizing, and I would recommend it to anybody. And apparently she's written a whole bunch of fantastic books. But these are all kinds of voices that you couldn't hear anywhere else, and they're all really unique and interesting, and the list just goes on and on and on and on and on.
Fantastic. People, would you have a question that you'd like to ask? It's class time now. I'll put my teacher hat back on again.
I do have a question. So Luke, I really like your essays, and I'm wondering if at some point there's going to be a second collection of essays.
Oh man, okay.
Sorry.
No. It's an interesting one, because I had written one book, and it was a short book of short fiction, and then I had, in the meantime, I was occasionally writing essays, and my publisher said, why don't you collect up all your essays, and we'll publish it as a book. And I thought it doesn't make sense, because I've got one book. Essay collection sort of seems to me like something someone does when they have established themselves, pretty firmly as some sort of authority, not as in a position of power or anything, but someone who's credible. And they said no, it'll be fine, and but it was a kind of, I'm glad I wrote the collection and it came out, but it was a strange experience, because it just sort of, I think it would have, I don't know if it reached more people than it would have done if the essays just went out one by one online. Not that that's necessarily the goal, but also this is the other thing as well. Some of those essays were critical, criticism, like reading other people's work and so on, and I've now got to the point where I don't think I'm comfortable writing about other writers anymore. It just seems it just seems wrong in some way. At least ones who are living, because if you would know yourself, it's when you read things people are writing about you and saying about you, it has a very strange effect, and you don't know what you're saying, what that's going to do to a writer. And maybe I just sort of got this weird feeling now that maybe it's not my place to be warping the writers around me. So, not that I've got this power, I can just warp people. But you know what I mean. And so I'd have to find new subjects. Also, well, yeah, I could write about Joyce, but the problem is, lots of people way smarter than me have already done that, and but yeah, I don't know if it happens. If I'd have to start writing essays again, maybe when I'm old and I've been writing for 40 years or something, one a year maybe. But I'm in no rush to do it again. Also, it was got a lot of really bad reviews because I took on a lot of subjects, and so they came straight back at me. But I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
It was an enjoyable read.
Thanks, yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, Luke, thank you so much for this evening. That's been an absolute wonderful conversation. I've learned a lot. I've loved to sit here and listen and just go, I want to just drink this all in and just go, I've had a wonderful time. So thank you for your absolute wonderful work. Please, everyone, grab it, buy it, read it. I thoroughly endorse it as a reader and as a writer. It's gloriously beautiful. So, thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Thank you very much. Cheers. Thanks, Adam.